One glance. One touch. And a life she never planned for. Hannah had stopped believing in beginnings. They were a convenient myth people used to make sense of things that only became meaningful later, when memories softened the edges and arranged moments into something that looked intentional. Life, as she knew it, rarely announced itself. It happened quietly, then asked to be understood long after the fact. That afternoon, the rain came down without warning. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no wind tearing at the street, but persistent, soaking, the kind that slipped beneath collars and dampened resolve. Hannah had been walking home from work, mind half occupied with the familiar ache of routine, when she gave in and stepped into the nearest open doorway. A bookshop. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, the sound oddly intimate, as though she'd been noticed. Warmth wrapped around her immediately, the dry, comforting smell of old paper and wood polish, of dust that had settled into corners undisturbed for decades. She stood there for a moment, letting the rain drip from her coat, listening to the muted hush that only independent bookshops seemed to hold. The world outside felt far away, softened by glass and time. That was when she saw Claire. She was standing by the poetry shelves, turned slightly away, one foot braced casually against the lower bookcase. Her posture suggested someone unguarded, absorbed. She held a book open in both hands, brow faintly furrowed, lips parted just enough to suggest she might be mouthing the words silently. Hannah noticed details without trying to. The sleeves of Claire's jumper were pushed up, revealing forearms marked faintly with ink smudges, the kind left behind by someone who still wrote by hand. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, not styled so much as allowed. There was a stillness about her that felt deliberate, chosen. Hannah felt something shift in her chest. Not desire. Not yet. Recognition. It unsettled her precisely because it didn't demand anything. It simply existed, as though something long dormant had been gently touched awake. Claire looked up then, perhaps sensing the attention. Their eyes met. The moment stretched, not long enough to be uncomfortable, but long enough to register. Claire's gaze was steady, curious rather than assessing. Hannah realized with a strange clarity that she was being seen, not scanned. Claire smiled, not broadly, not performatively, but in a way that softened her face. Hannah felt absurdly exposed. She turned away first, pretending sudden interest in a nearby display, heart beating harder than the situation warranted. She told herself it was nothing, just a stranger in a quiet place, just a moment her mind was misinterpreting. But when Claire spoke, it was as though the thought had already been answered. "Sorry," she said gently. "Do you know if this one's any good?" Hannah turned back. Claire held up the book slightly, as if offering it into shared space. Poetry. A slim volume, the kind people bought either because they were desperate or because they were hopeful. "I haven't read it," Hannah replied honestly. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "But I think poetry's more about timing than quality." Claire considered this, then laughed softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't guarded. It was the laugh of someone surprised by an idea they liked. "That's actually comforting," she said. "I keep thinking I should love poetry more than I do. Maybe you just haven't met the right poem yet." Claire's smile widened. "Or the right day." They stood there talking, then, about books abandoned halfway through, about stories that lingered long after the last page, about the strange intimacy of reading someone else's thoughts alone in a crowded room. Hannah learned that Claire came to the shop often but never with a list. Claire learned that Hannah preferred essays to novels but wished she didn't. They spoke about rain. About silence. About nothing that would later seem important, except that everything did. When the rain finally eased, Hannah glanced toward the door with reluctance she tried not to show. "I should go," she said. Claire nodded, disappointment flickering across her face before she masked it. "Yes. Me too." They hesitated, standing too close now, the air between them charged with something unnamed. "Well," Claire said. "It was nice meeting you." "Yeah," Hannah replied. "It was." They didn't exchange numbers. They didn't promise anything. When Hannah stepped back into the street, the rain had thinned to a mist. She walked home slowly, the weight of the encounter settling in her chest, not heavy, but present. She told herself it was nothing. But later that night, lying awake, she realized something had already begun. Not a love story. A question. Hannah woke the next morning with the quiet, persistent sense that something had shifted overnight. It wasn't dramatic. There was no rush of memory or sudden clarity. Just a faint awareness, like a sound she couldn't quite place, a note humming beneath the ordinary noise of her day. She noticed it while brushing her teeth, while tying her shoes, while standing at the bus stop watching rainwater gather and slide along the curb. She told herself it was nothing. She had lived long enough to know that brief encounters sometimes lingered longer than they deserved. Memory was generous that way, capable of elevating small moments into symbols. A woman in a bookshop did not mean anything on its own. And yet, at work, Hannah found herself distracted in ways she wasn't used to anymore. She taught literature at a local college, an environment she had once found energizing but now navigated with practiced ease. Her students noticed when she paused mid-sentence, gaze unfocused, as if she were listening for something just out of reach. She blamed lack of sleep. Still, when a student asked her to recommend a book of poetry, Hannah hesitated, then smiled to herself at the coincidence. She suggested something safe, something she knew well. But later, alone in her office, she wondered what Claire would have chosen instead. The thought startled her. She didn't know Claire. Not really. She knew the curve of her smile, the sound of her laugh, the way she held a book like it mattered. Those were impressions, not facts. And yet they had slipped easily into her inner life, making themselves at home. Hannah had always been susceptible to that, to the idea of people rather than their reality. It was one of the reasons she had learned caution. In her 20s, she had fallen in love quickly and often, mistaking intensity for intimacy. She had chased women who burned brightly and briefly, women who spoke in absolutes and vanished at the first sign of complication. Each ending had taught her something, though she hadn't always wanted the lesson. By her late 30s, she had become careful. Wanting, she had learned, had a shape. It began as curiosity, sharpened into anticipation, and, if left unchecked, expanded into longing. Hannah had spent years learning how to interrupt that progression before it overtook her. She knew how to redirect her thoughts, how to ground herself in routine, how to let moments pass without assigning them meaning. She had thought she was done wanting. That afternoon, she found herself walking a longer route home, passing the bookshop without quite admitting why. The rain had returned, softer this time, the sky heavy with it. She slowed as she approached the familiar doorway, heart beating just a little faster than necessary. The bell chimed when she entered. Claire was not there. Hannah felt a small, irrational pang of disappointment. She wandered the aisles aimlessly, fingers trailing along spines, pretending she had come for a reason. She picked up a book of essays she already owned, then put it back. The shop felt different now, emptier, less charged. She stayed longer than she meant to, as if waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. On her way out, she caught her reflection in the glass, brow furrowed, mouth set in a line she didn't recognize. She laughed quietly at herself. Get a grip, she thought. You spoke to a stranger. But over the following days, Claire continued to appear in her thoughts, uninvited and unannounced. Hannah remembered the ink on her hands, the gentleness of her voice. She imagined her life in fragments, where she lived, what she did, what she loved when she wasn't standing in a bookshop talking to women she might never see again. She wondered, absently, whether Claire loved women at all. The question lingered longer than it should have. Hannah had always been open about who she was, at least in theory. She didn't hide her sexuality, but she also didn't announce it. Years of navigating assumptions had taught her that disclosure was a negotiation, one she sometimes grew tired of participating in. With Claire, the question felt different. It wasn't fear that held her back from imagining more, it was restraint. A quiet voice reminding her that hope, once allowed to grow, was difficult to contain. Hannah had learned to protect herself not by closing off, but by choosing carefully where she placed her attention. And yet, late one evening, she caught herself standing in her kitchen, wine glass forgotten on the counter, staring out the window and thinking of Claire's smile. The realization unsettled her. She hadn't felt this way in years, not this gentle pull, not this low-grade ache that asked nothing and promised nothing in return. It felt less like desire and more like recognition delayed, as if something she hadn't known she was missing had briefly been returned to her and then taken away again. She wondered, not for the first time, whether she should have asked for Claire's number. The thought stayed with her long into the night. In bed, Hannah lay awake, listening to the city breathe around her. She thought about all the times she had mistaken urgency for truth, all the times she had rushed towards something because she was afraid of losing it. This felt different. Quieter. Almost patient. That was what frightened her. Because patience implied possibility. And possibility implied choice. Eventually, sleep came, but it was restless. In her dreams, Hannah stood in the bookshop again, reaching for a book that wasn't there, while someone watched her from just beyond the shelves. When she woke, the feeling remained. Wanting, she realized, didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waited, shapeless, persistent, until you were brave enough to look directly at it. Absence, Hannah had learned, was rarely empty. It had weight. Texture. It pressed in around the edges of a day, shaping thoughts without ever fully announcing itself. She noticed it in the spaces between tasks, in the moments when her attention wandered without invitation. It was there when she reached for her phone with no one in mind to call. When she lingered over coffee she didn't need to drink slowly. Claire's absence had begun to feel oddly specific. Hannah did not say Claire's name aloud, not even to herself, but it echoed anyway, softly, persistently, threaded through her routines. The memory of her presence in the bookshop had grown more vivid with time rather than less, as though the mind, denied repetition, had decided to preserve the moment carefully. She told herself this was normal. A harmless fixation. A story the mind told itself to pass the time. Still, she found herself returning to the bookshop. Not every day. That would have been too obvious, too intentional. Instead, she folded it into her life casually, the way one might begin taking a different street without admitting why. Sometimes she went in and out quickly, pretending to browse before leaving again. Other times she stayed longer, letting the quiet soothe her. Claire was never there. The woman at the counter began to recognize Hannah, greeting her with a nod that suggested familiarity. Hannah wondered, briefly, whether Claire was a regular in the same way, whether she too had become a quiet fixture in someone else's peripheral vision. The thought unsettled her. At night, Hannah's dreams grew more vivid. She dreamed of conversations that never quite reached their end, of questions that went unasked. She dreamed of standing in crowded rooms and finding Claire across them, always just out of reach, always watching. In the mornings, she woke with the faint ache of disappointment, the kind that faded quickly but left a trace. She began to question herself. This was not how she behaved anymore. She had built her life carefully, brick by brick, choosing stability over volatility, solitude over longing. She had learned to be content with her own company, to find satisfaction in work and friendships that did not demand too much. So why now? The question followed her through the week, surfacing unexpectedly in the middle of lectures and conversations. She found herself less present with friends, nodding along while her thoughts drifted elsewhere. One evening, over dinner with her closest friend, Miriam, Hannah laughed at something she hadn't fully heard. "You're somewhere else," Miriam said, narrowing her eyes. "That's new." Hannah hesitated. She considered deflecting, making a joke of it. Instead, she said carefully, "I met someone." Miriam's eyebrows rose. "Met someone how?" Briefly, Hannah replied. "Once." "And yet," Miriam said, smiling. "Here we are." Hannah smiled back, but there was tension beneath it. "It doesn't mean anything." "Of course not," Miriam said easily. But it might. The word landed heavily between them. Later, walking home alone, Hannah replayed the conversation. She resented how easily Miriam had named what Hannah herself had been trying not to. Might was a dangerous word. It opened doors Hannah had learned to keep closed. She reached her building and paused before going inside, rain dampening her coat once again. The city lights blurred softly, familiar and distant all at once. She thought of Claire then, not as a possibility, but as a presence that had altered something fundamental in her. The absence was no longer neutral. It had begun to ask questions of her, to demand attention. 2 weeks passed. And then, on an ordinary Thursday evening, Hannah saw her. It happened so suddenly that Hannah almost didn't trust her own eyes. She was stepping off the bus when she noticed a familiar figure across the street, half hidden by the flow of people. The same loose hair. The same way of standing, weight shifted slightly to one side. Claire. Hannah's heart leapt, sharp and immediate. For a moment, she froze, watching as Claire spoke to someone beside her. Laughter, yes, that was the same laugh, Hannah was sure of it now. The recognition was instant, undeniable. Her body responded before her mind could catch up. Claire turned, scanning the street, and their eyes met again. This time, the moment cracked open. Claire's face lit up with surprise and something else Hannah recognized too late as relief. She raised a hand instinctively, as though afraid Hannah might disappear if she didn't anchor her somehow. "Hannah," she said, crossing the street quickly. "I was hoping I'd see you again." The words settled into Hannah like a confession. "I thought I imagined you," Hannah admitted, the truth escaping before she could stop it. Claire smiled, softer now. "I hoped I didn't." They stood there, traffic rushing around them, the city moving impatiently past as if their stillness were an inconvenience. "You live around here?" Hannah asked, grasping for something neutral, something safe. "Close enough," Claire replied. "I was starting to think that bookshop was our only shared geography." Hannah laughed, surprised by the warmth in her own chest. "I wondered that too." The coincidence felt too precise to dismiss, yet too ordinary to explain. It hovered between them, unspoken but acknowledged. "Can I?" Claire hesitated, then took a breath. "Can I buy you a coffee? Or is that too forward?" Hannah didn't hesitate this time. Coffee would be perfect. They walked together, steps falling easily into rhythm, conversation resuming as if it had merely been paused rather than interrupted. Hannah noticed how quickly her body relaxed in Claire's presence, how the tension she hadn't known she was carrying eased. As they sat across from each other in the cafe, steam rising between them, Hannah felt the shape of wanting shift again, becoming less abstract, more real. Absence, she realized, had not diminished what she felt. It had clarified it. The cafe was louder than Hannah would have chosen on her own. Milk steamed behind the counter, cups clinked against saucers, voices overlapped in a low, constant murmur. Normally, she found places like this distracting. Too much movement. Too much noise. But sitting across from Claire, the chaos softened, receding into something like background music. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug, shoulders relaxed now, as though the simple act of sitting together had released a tension Hannah hadn't noticed before. "I can't believe we ran into each other like that," Claire said. "Twice." Hannah smiled. "I'm starting to suspect the universe has opinions." Claire laughed. Or at least a sense of humor. They talked easily, slipping back into the rhythm they had established weeks ago in the bookshop. Books, again, and then work. Claire worked in archives, preserving old documents, a job Hannah found immediately charming. It explained the ink on her hands, the reverence with which she treated paper. "I like things that last," Claire said, almost apologetically. Things people thought were worth saving. Hannah felt something shift at that, a subtle alignment. "Me too," she said, surprised by how true it felt. They spoke about the city, where they lived, the neighborhoods they liked best. Claire lived close enough that Hannah could picture the overlap now, the invisible circles their lives had been drawing around each other without meeting. "No wonder we keep crossing paths," Hannah said. Claire tilted her head. "Do you think it's coincidence?" The question hung between them, gentle but deliberate. "I think," Hannah said carefully, "that coincidence is sometimes just meaning we don't understand yet." Claire's eyes held hers, thoughtful. "I like that." The conversation deepened gradually, moving from the external to the personal in that careful way Hannah had learned to appreciate. They spoke about family, Claire's complicated relationship with hers, Hannah's distance from her own. About relationships that had shaped them and those that had left quiet scars. Claire listened intently, not interrupting, asking questions that felt considered rather than curious. "You're very careful," Claire observed at one point. Hannah blinked. "Am I?" "Yes," Claire said gently. "Not closed. Just measured." Hannah smiled ruefully. "I've learned the hard way." Claire nodded, as if she understood more than Hannah had said. When they finally stood to leave, the light outside had shifted. Evening had crept in unnoticed, softening the edges of the street. They lingered by the door. "I'm glad we ran into each other again," Claire said. "Me too," Hannah replied. This time, she didn't qualify it. Claire hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "Can I give you my number? In case the universe takes a break." Hannah laughed, relief washing through her. "I was hoping you'd ask." Their fingers brushed as Claire handed her the phone, the contact saved quickly, almost ceremonially. The touch was brief, but it lingered, electric and restrained. They stood there a moment longer than necessary. "I'll text you," Claire said. "I'll look forward to it," Hannah replied. Walking home, Hannah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The wanting that had been shapeless and distant now had direction. It still didn't demand anything, but it felt closer, more possible. Later that night, her phone buzzed. "Claire, I'm glad we didn't let that be a one-time thing." Hannah smiled, fingers hovering over the screen before replying. "Hannah, me too." She set the phone down, heart steady and warm. Coincidences, she thought, were often just beginnings wearing disguises. Hannah had always believed that voices revealed more than faces. Faces could be arranged, smiles practiced, expressions controlled. Voices, though, betrayed hesitation, warmth, the small pauses where meaning hid. She listened for these things instinctively, the way some people watched hands or eyes. Claire's voice, she discovered, changed depending on the time of day. In text messages, it was thoughtful and precise, sentences carefully shaped but never stiff. Claire chose her words the way she handled old paper, with care, with respect. She asked questions that invited rather than demanded answers. Hannah found herself responding more openly than she intended, sharing details she usually kept folded away. Their texting began casually. "A book recommendation here. An observation about the weather there." But soon it developed a rhythm, good mornings, lingering exchanges in the evenings, messages sent without a clear purpose beyond connection. One night, after a particularly long day, Hannah stared at her phone, unsure whether to cross a line she hadn't quite defined yet. "Do you want to talk?" She typed, then erased. "Are you free?" Erased again. Before she could overthink it, her phone buzzed. "Claire, would it be strange if I called you?" Hannah smiled. "Not strange at all." The phone rang almost immediately. "Hi," Claire said, her voice softer than Hannah had imagined. "Hi," Hannah replied, suddenly aware of how quiet her flat felt. There was a brief pause, comfortable, unhurried. "I wasn't sure," Claire admitted. "Texts are easier. Less exposed." "I know," Hannah said. "But I like this." "So do I." They talked for nearly an hour. About their days. About small frustrations and small victories. Claire told Hannah about a document she'd discovered at work, a letter hidden inside a book, written decades earlier, never sent. Hannah told Claire about a student who had surprised her with insight. Listening to Claire speak, Hannah noticed the subtle shifts, the way her voice grew animated when she spoke about history, the quiet laughter that followed self-deprecating comments. It felt intimate in a way Hannah hadn't experienced in a long time. After they hung up, Hannah sat in the dark, phone still warm in her hand. She realized something then. She was no longer waiting for something to happen. It was happening. Over the following weeks, their connection deepened in small, deliberate ways. Calls replaced texts more often than not. They began to recognize each other's moods before they were named. When Hannah was tired, Claire slowed the conversation, filled the silence gently. When Claire was anxious, Hannah listened without trying to fix anything. They met for walks, then dinners. Always with an ease that felt earned rather than accidental. One evening, as they walked along the river, the city lights reflected in dark water, Claire stopped suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Hannah turned to face her. "Of course." Claire hesitated. "Do you ever feel like you're standing on the edge of something? Like one step forward would change everything?" Hannah felt the truth of it settle between them. "Yes," she said quietly. "All the time." Claire nodded, as if that was enough. They stood there, close but not touching, the space between them charged and careful. Hannah felt the familiar instinct to hold back, to preserve the equilibrium they had built. But she also felt something else. A willingness. As they parted that night, Claire leaned in, hesitating just long enough for Hannah to decide. Hannah closed the distance. The kiss was brief, more a promise than an act, but it carried weight. Claire's lips were warm, her breath unsteady. "Good night," Claire whispered, resting her forehead briefly against Hannah's. "Good night," Hannah replied, heart pounding. Walking home, Hannah realized she had crossed a threshold she could not retreat from. She didn't want to. Learning Claire's voice, she understood now, meant learning its absence would matter. And that changed everything. The space between hands, Hannah discovered, could hold an entire history. It was there when they walked side by side, close enough that their arms brushed occasionally, sending quiet sparks up Hannah's spine. It was there when they sat across from each other at tables too small for distance to feel accidental. It was there in every moment they chose not to touch, even when touching would have been the easier thing. Restraint, Hannah knew, was not the absence of desire. It was desire given shape. After the kiss, nothing was said directly about what it meant. They didn't dissect it, didn't rush to define it. Instead, they let it settle naturally into their interactions, changing the temperature without changing the rhythm. But Hannah felt it everywhere. She felt it when Claire laughed and leaned just a little closer than necessary. When Claire's gaze lingered on her mouth before returning politely to her eyes. When Hannah caught herself imagining the weight of Claire's hand in hers and had to remind herself to breathe. They were careful, both of them. That care felt mutual, negotiated without words. Hannah recognized it as something precious, two people moving slowly not because they were unsure, but because they were certain enough to wait. Still, the waiting was not easy. One evening, Claire invited Hannah over for dinner. "Nothing fancy," she'd said. "Just pasta and too much garlic." Hannah arrived with a bottle of wine and a nervousness she hadn't felt in years. Claire's flat was small and warm, filled with books and plants and the faint scent of citrus soap. It felt unmistakably lived in. Claire moved easily in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loosely back. Hannah leaned against the counter, watching her without pretending otherwise. "You can sit," Claire said, smiling. "You don't have to supervise." "I like watching you," Hannah replied, then froze, surprised by her own honesty. Claire paused, turned, and met her gaze. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. "Good," Claire said softly. They ate at a small table near the window, knees brushing occasionally. Conversation flowed, punctuated by silences that felt deliberate rather than awkward. After dinner, they moved to the sofa, wine glasses in hand. The city hummed faintly outside. Claire sat close enough now that Hannah could feel her warmth. The space between their hands rested on the cushion like a question neither had yet answered. "I've been thinking," Claire said quietly. Hannah's pulse quickened. About? About how carefully we're doing this. Hannah nodded. "Is that a complaint?" "No," Claire said quickly. "It's a relief. And also terrifying." Hannah smiled. "That sounds right." Claire set her glass down. Her hands shifted slightly, close enough that Hannah could feel the heat of it. "I don't want to rush you," Claire said. "Or myself. But I also don't want to pretend I don't feel this." She gestured vaguely between them. Hannah swallowed. "Neither do I." For a moment, neither moved. Then Claire reached out, slowly, deliberately, and rested her hand over Hannah's. The contact was simple. It felt monumental. Hannah's breath caught as warmth spread through her palm, grounding and electric all at once. Claire's thumb brushed lightly against her skin, a touch so gentle it felt almost reverent. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, saying nothing. The intimacy of it overwhelmed Hannah in a way she hadn't anticipated. This was not hunger or urgency. This was presence. Permission. A shared understanding that whatever came next would be intentional. When Claire finally leaned in to kiss her, it was unhurried. Their mouths met softly, then deepened, learning pressure and rhythm. Hannah felt Claire's other hand rest at her waist, steady and warm. The kiss lingered, slow and consuming. When they parted, both were breathless. Claire rested her forehead against Hannah's. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Hannah replied immediately. "More than okay." They didn't go further that night. Instead, they stayed there, touching occasionally, hands, shoulders, knees, letting closeness be enough. Hannah realized, with a sense of quiet wonder, that she felt safe. Not guarded. Not braced for loss. Just present. Later, walking home under a sky heavy with stars she rarely noticed, Hannah understood something essential. Desire didn't always demand fulfillment. Sometimes, it asked for patience. And sometimes, the space between hands was where love learned how to last. The past did not announce itself when it arrived. It slipped in quietly, disguised as memory, as habit, as instinct. It surfaced not in grand confessions but in small hesitations, moments Hannah barely noticed until they had already passed. She realized it one morning when Claire reached for her hand on the street and Hannah stiffened, just slightly, before relaxing again. The reaction was subtle enough that Claire might have missed it. But Hannah felt it immediately, a tightening she recognized too well. Fear had a body memory. They were growing closer now in ways that felt both inevitable and unsettling. Their evenings blurred into one another, shared meals, long conversations that wandered from childhood to politics to the strange comfort of silence. They touched more freely, hands on backs, fingers brushing hair away from faces, the quiet intimacy of familiarity beginning to take root. And with it came vulnerability. Hannah had not planned to tell Claire about her past, not yet. She believed in timing, in letting things surface organically. But history had a way of making itself known whether invited or not. One evening, they lay side by side on Claire's sofa, shoes discarded, the room lit only by a lamp in the corner. Hannah's head rested against Claire's shoulder, the steady rise and fall of her breathing soothing. Claire traced idle patterns along Hannah's arm, absent-minded, affectionate. "You go quiet sometimes," Claire said softly. "Not distant. Just, inward." Hannah considered denying it. Instead, she sighed. "I'm thinking," she said. "About?" Hannah hesitated. Then, about what it means to want something again. Claire's hand stilled. She turned slightly, careful not to break the closeness. "Does it scare you?" "Yes," Hannah admitted. The honesty surprised her with its ease. Claire nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "Me too." Encouraged, Hannah continued. "I used to fall hard. Quickly. I thought intensity was proof. I didn't know how to stop once I started. She paused, swallowing. It didn't always end well. Claire didn't interrupt. Her stillness was an invitation. I learned to protect myself, Hannah said. To slow everything down. To leave space between feeling and action. Claire smiled gently. And now? And now, Hannah said, voice quieter, I don't know how to tell when protection becomes avoidance. Claire considered this. I think avoidance feels like shrinking, she said. Protection feels like choosing. Hannah let the words settle. They felt true in a way that bypassed logic. Claire shifted, turning fully toward her now. For what it's worth, I'm not in a hurry. But I am here. Something in Hannah's chest loosened. Later that night, lying awake in her own bed, Hannah replayed the conversation. She thought about the woman she had been years ago, open, reckless, certain that love would save her if she just wanted it badly enough. She thought about the woman she had become, measured, cautious, reluctant to hope. Neither felt quite right anymore. The next time they saw each other, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. Hannah found herself less guarded, more willing to lean into the moments that scared her. She reached for Claire's hand first. She kissed her without hesitation. She let herself linger in the warmth of Claire's presence without mentally mapping an escape. Claire noticed. You seem different, she said one afternoon as they walked through a park, autumn leaves crunching underfoot. Hannah smiled. I feel different. Good different? Yes, Hannah said. Then added, terrifying different. Claire laughed softly. That's usually the best kind. Still, the past did not loosen its grip easily. Some nights, Hannah dreamed of old arguments, old endings. She woke with her heart racing, the echo of loss sharp and immediate. When she told Claire about it, haltingly, Claire didn't try to reassure her away from it. That makes sense, she said. You loved deeply. That doesn't disappear just because it hurt. Hannah looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not only tenderness but resilience. Someone who understood that loving meant risk and chose it anyway. Old wounds, Hannah realized, didn't disappear. But they could become new skin. Stronger. More aware. Capable of feeling without breaking. And for the first time in a long while, Hannah believed she might be ready to let that happen. Summer arrived without asking permission. It settled into the city in long, bright days and evenings that refused to end, stretching time in ways that felt both indulgent and destabilizing. Windows stayed open. Shirt sleeves replaced coats. The air itself seemed to hum with possibility. Hannah noticed the change in herself first. She laughed more easily now. She found herself anticipating moments instead of managing them. There were mornings she woke with Claire's voice still echoing faintly in her mind, and instead of pushing the feeling aside, she let it stay. They saw each other often, too often to pretend this was casual, not often enough to feel certain. Their lives were still separate in practical ways, but emotionally, something had shifted. They moved with an awareness of one another that felt intimate and new. One evening, Claire suggested they walk instead of sitting somewhere. It feels wrong to be indoors, she said. Like we'd be missing something. They walked without destination, the city unfolding around them in familiar streets that felt suddenly transformed. People lingered on stoops, music drifted from open windows, laughter spilled out of bars and cafes. They walked until the noise softened and the streets grew quieter. Claire stopped near a small park, the grass worn smooth in places by long use. Fireflies flickered faintly in the dusk. Hannah hadn't noticed them at first, they appeared suddenly, as if summoned. Do you ever feel like this season makes everything more honest? Claire asked. Hannah considered it. I think it makes things harder to hide. Claire nodded. That's what I meant. They sat on a bench, close enough that Hannah could feel Claire's thigh against hers. The contact was steady, grounding. I've been thinking about something, Claire said. Hannah turned to her, heart quickening. Okay. Claire took a breath, then another. I don't want to keep pretending this is undefined. Not because I need labels, but because I need truth. The words settled heavily between them. Hannah felt the familiar flicker of fear, but it was quieter now, less commanding. She looked at Claire's face, open, earnest, unguarded in a way that felt like an offering. I care about you, Claire continued. More than I expected to. More than feels safe. Hannah swallowed. Her chest felt tight, full. I do too, she said. Then, after a pause, I think I've been falling in love with you. The confession felt like stepping off a ledge. Claire's breath hitched. She reached for Hannah's hand, fingers threading through hers with certainty. I think, Claire said softly, that I already am. The world seemed to narrow around them, the rest of the city receding into background noise. Hannah felt something settle inside her, not relief, exactly, but alignment. The words hadn't changed what was there, they had named it. They kissed then, deeper than before, unrestrained by hesitation. Claire's hand slid into Hannah's hair, steady and warm. Hannah felt herself melt into the contact, the months of careful restraint dissolving into something tender and inevitable. When they pulled back, both were breathing hard. Was that too much? Hannah asked quietly. Claire smiled, eyes bright. It was exactly enough. They stayed there long after the fireflies faded, talking in low voices about nothing and everything. About what they wanted. About what they feared. About the ways they had learned to survive and the ways they were learning to trust again. Later, walking home, Hannah felt lighter and heavier all at once. Naming love had not diminished it. It had given it weight. At her door, she turned to Claire. I don't know where this leads, Hannah said. Claire squeezed her hand. I don't need to know yet. I just need to walk there with you. Hannah nodded, heart full. Summer confessions, she realized, were not about heat or impulse. They were about courage. There is a difference between desire and trust, Hannah realized that night. Desire arrives quickly, burning bright and unrestrained. Trust creeps in slowly, like water carving a channel through stone. Firsts matter not because of the intensity of sensation but because of the permission given, the vulnerability accepted, the understanding that whatever comes next is earned, not demanded. It was a Thursday evening when it happened, unremarkable in every way except for the way time seemed to fold around it. Hannah had stayed late at work, grading papers she could barely concentrate on, her thoughts drifting to Claire. The text messages had been playful throughout the day, building a rhythm neither could deny, the kind of rhythm that tightened the chest while loosening the heart. When she arrived at Claire's apartment, the air was thick with the scent of fresh basil and something faintly floral, a candle flickering softly on the counter. Claire met her at the door, smiling in that way that disarmed Hannah instantly. Hey, Claire said. Her voice was low, warm, intimate. I was hoping you'd come. I wouldn't have missed it, Hannah replied, stepping inside. They moved to the sofa, shedding coats, exchanging small gestures, the way fingers brushed, the slight press of a shoulder, that had become language all their own. Neither spoke about what they were feeling in words. Words were inadequate. The understanding had been building for months, woven into long walks, coffee dates, shared laughter, the quiet moments of presence that had already claimed pieces of their hearts. Claire reached for Hannah's hand first, guiding it to rest lightly on her knee. The touch was electric in its gentleness, a spark that spread slowly through Hannah's chest. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in, letting the warmth of Claire's skin ground her. I want to be careful, Claire whispered. I don't want to rush anything that matters. Hannah smiled, feeling the truth of that statement deep in her bones. I know. And I don't want that either. But I want this. With you. Claire leaned in, and their lips met. It started softly, exploratory, testing the waters of intimacy that had been slowly warming over months of small touches and meaningful glances. But as the kiss deepened, hesitation dissolved. Hannah felt Claire's hands tracing her arms, her back, learning the terrain of someone else's desire without a word. Every brush of skin, every sigh, every shared breath became a conversation that didn't need punctuation. The boundaries they had carefully observed for months now melted into trust, each movement deliberate yet unforced. When they finally paused, faces inches apart, Claire rested her forehead against Hannah's. "You're careful," she said. "But with me. That's the difference." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear, not from regret, but from recognition. From the rare and beautiful acknowledgement that love could be both patient and urgent, both fragile and resilient. "I've waited a long time to feel safe like this," Hannah admitted. "I wasn't sure it was possible." Claire kissed her again, slower this time, a silent affirmation. "It's possible," she said softly. "With you." They didn't need to speak after that. The rest of the night unfolded in quiet reverence, hands exploring, breath sinking, trust becoming tangible, woven into skin and lips and the shared warmth of bodies that had, until that night, only tentatively imagined closeness. For Hannah, the first night with Claire wasn't about discovery in the sense of novelty. It was about confirmation. About the recognition that the months of restraint, patience, and observation had led here, not to lust alone, but to intimacy earned, chosen, and held sacred. When Hannah finally left Claire's apartment in the early hours, stepping out into the cool night, she felt light, steady, full in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her heart had been claimed gently, irrevocably, and in that claiming, she had found a quiet joy that neither fear nor memory could diminish. Firsts mattered because they weren't fleeting. They were the foundation on which the rest of a shared life could be built. And Hannah, for the first time in years, believed she could build with Claire. Love, Hannah realized, was not a single moment of intensity. It was 1,000 quiet choices, 1,000 small gestures that mattered far more than the fireworks of passion. The firsts were intoxicating, yes, but it was the everydays, the routines, the subtle care that spoke most clearly of a love that could last. By now, Claire and Hannah had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and natural. They texted in the mornings, sometimes just a short, "good morning," or a silly meme, and still found themselves lingering on the phone late at night, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Weekends were for walks through neighborhoods neither had explored alone, for coffee in tiny cafes, for grocery shopping and the kind of idle chatter that only mattered when someone was listening with full attention. Hannah discovered the small ways Claire remembered her, how she liked her tea with just a touch of milk, how she always preferred her pillow fluff just so, how she hesitated before accepting compliments even when she deserved them. Hannah, in turn, allowed Claire into the quiet corners of her life, the worn armchair by the window, the notebooks she kept for personal thoughts, the playlists she only shared with herself. She learned the cadence of Claire's mornings, the small rituals that gave her comfort, the way her fingers curled when she was deep in thought. One rainy Wednesday, Hannah arrived at Claire's apartment carrying groceries and a bottle of wine. Claire was perched on the counter, hair pinned loosely, a stack of old documents sprawled across the kitchen table. "You always bring wine on rainy days," Claire observed, smiling. "I think it pairs well with listening to the rain," Hannah said, setting down the bag. Claire tilted her head. "And what about listening to me?" Hannah laughed softly, washing her hands. "Always." They moved through the kitchen in sync, moving food from bags to fridge, chopping vegetables together, a dance of familiarity and attention. It was in these moments, Hannah realized, that love became practical. That it became a living thing, nurtured by attention and care rather than passion alone. Later, they sat on the couch, sharing a simple dinner of pasta and wine. Hannah watched Claire laugh at a story about her work, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, and felt a deep, steady warmth settle in her chest. "You're the most patient person I know," Claire said suddenly, reaching for Hannah's hand. "With everyone, and with me." Hannah squeezed her hand back. "I learned patience the hard way." "And now?" Claire asked. "Now," Hannah said, her voice soft, "I get to practice it with someone who makes it worth it." The gesture was small, but the significance immense. They leaned into one another, shoulders touching, foreheads brushing, hands intertwined. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows in a gentle rhythm. Inside, the quiet companionship of two people who had chosen each other felt like home. Love, Hannah realized, was in these daily acts, the way Claire made her tea just the way she liked it, the way she listened when Hannah ranted about a student, the way she rested her head on Hannah's shoulder without a word. It wasn't the grand declarations or the dramatic gestures, it was the consistency, the reliability, the sacred smallness of ordinary life made shared. By the time Hannah left that evening, the city dark and wet around her, she felt full. Not in a way that required thrill or urgency, but in the calm, grounding way of knowing she belonged somewhere. That someone belonged with her. Love, she thought, could be quiet, and it could endure. And that was more powerful than anything else. Hannah had grown accustomed to quiet love, the kind that existed in small gestures, in private corners of their lives. But the world, as it often does, had a way of intruding at inconvenient moments. It started subtly. A colleague at work commenting on how bright Hannah had seemed lately, another asking if she had a new interest. Rumors drifted from students who noticed the subtle way Claire's name appeared in casual conversation. It wasn't malicious at first, just curiosity, but it carried weight. The whispers of observation have a way of making even private life feel public. Claire noticed too. One evening, as they sat in her apartment, the city humming quietly outside, she reached for Hannah's hand. "They're talking," Claire said softly. Hannah felt the tension tighten immediately. "Are they?" "They are," Claire admitted. "But it's not just them. It's everyone. It's the world." Hannah looked down at their intertwined fingers. The threat wasn't immediate, but it was real. They lived in a society that still measured love in narrow definitions. That asked questions and raised eyebrows at relationships it didn't understand. And theirs, careful, tender, undeniably real, was outside that comfort zone. "I don't care," Hannah said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I care about us. Not about what they think." Claire studied her, concern lingering in her gaze. "I know. But it's hard sometimes, isn't it? To feel like we're observed, judged, reduced to gossip." "Yes," Hannah admitted, "it's hard. But I'd rather risk judgment than risk living quietly without you." Claire smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Hannah's face. "I'm glad we feel the same." They weren't naive. They knew that friends and colleagues would whisper. That some doors would close. That questions might be asked of them in casual cruelty or innocent curiosity. But they also knew that their love, its careful construction, its intimacy, its resilience, was not something that could be dismantled by observation. A week later, it escalated. A mutual acquaintance asked pointed questions in public, teasing in a way that made Hannah feel exposed. At first, she wanted to retreat, to shrink, to avoid the scrutiny. But then she remembered Claire's hand in hers, the steady warmth of their connection. "You want to go?" Claire asked quietly, standing beside her. Hannah shook her head. "No. We're not hiding." Together, they responded calmly, with dignity, deflecting the curiosity with gentle honesty. The world was watching, yes, but for the first time, Hannah realized that they didn't have to be afraid of its gaze. Love wasn't fragile. Their love, at least, could endure. That night, back in the quiet of Claire's apartment, they held each other close. The city outside was a mixture of noise, lights, and judgment, but inside, the world could not reach them. The world could look all it wanted. They were not performing. They were simply being. Hannah rested her head against Claire's shoulder. "I don't want to hide anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to," Claire replied, fingers tracing lazy patterns along her arm. "Not from me. Not from anyone who matters." For the first time, Hannah realized that love didn't just survive in secrecy. It thrived in defiance of fear, in the courage to exist fully, unapologetically, even when eyes were upon it. And in that quiet affirmation, she felt a deep, abiding strength, the strength of love that refuses to be diminished, no matter how loudly the world talks. Even the strongest hearts have moments of hesitation. For Hannah, fear spoke not as a roar but as a whisper, subtle and persistent, infiltrating the quiet moments she had worked so hard to cultivate. It wasn't about Claire, not really. It was about herself, about all the years of careful restraint, all the past heartbreaks, all the invisible scars that lingered beneath the surface. One rainy afternoon, Hannah sat on her sofa, staring at her hands as if they held the answers. The apartment was dimly lit, the city outside dripping with water, and for a moment, the quiet felt heavy rather than soothing. Claire had been texting all morning, eager to meet for lunch, to talk, to laugh. And yet, Hannah found herself unable to respond. The words caught in her throat. She wasn't afraid of Claire's love, but of the vulnerability that came with fully embracing it. Memories surfaced unbidden, old lovers who left without explanation, promises made and broken, moments of openness met with indifference or cruelty. They were ghosts that refused to vanish, and suddenly, despite the warmth she felt for Claire, they seemed louder than the present. When Claire arrived, her smile didn't falter, though she noticed the distance immediately. "Hannah," she asked gently, sitting beside her. "What's wrong?" Hannah hesitated. She wanted to say everything, to confess the fear clawing at her chest, but the words felt heavy, too real. Instead, she shook her head. I don't know. I'm just tired, I guess." Claire's hand found hers instinctively, fingers curling around hers. "You can tell me. You don't have to be perfect, or strong, or okay all the time." Hannah's chest tightened. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to trust that Claire could hold her, flaws and all, without flinching. But old fear was insistent. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, voice small. "Scared that I'll ruin this. That I'll break us before we even fully exist together." Claire's thumb brushed softly over the back of her hand. "Hannah, love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up even when you're scared." Hannah's eyes filled. "But what if my fear pushes you away?" Claire leaned in, resting her forehead against Hannah's. "It won't. Not if you let me in. Not if you let us be honest with each other." The simplicity of it disarmed her. Love, Claire was saying, was not about grand gestures or flawless certainty. It was about trust. And trust, Hannah realized, required action even when fear spoke loudest. For the rest of the afternoon, they sat together, quiet but connected. Hannah let herself lean fully into Claire's presence, letting the warmth of her hand and the steadiness of her heartbeat dissolve the tension knotting her chest. Later, as Hannah walked home under a sky streaked with fading rain, she understood something essential. Fear was inevitable, but it didn't have to dictate the terms of their love. Fear would always whisper. Trust, she now knew, had the power to answer. And for the first time in years, Hannah felt ready to answer fear with courage. Love, Hannah realized, was not just about moments. It was about construction, the deliberate work of creating something lasting, brick by brick, day by day. And for the first time, she felt ready to build. Not alone. With Claire. It started small. Hannah brought her favorite chair over to Claire's apartment, the one she had loved for years, its cushions molded perfectly to her body. Claire, in turn, introduced Hannah to her routines, the way she organized her kitchen, the careful cataloging of her books, the rhythm of her mornings. They began to intertwine habits, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Weekends became joint ventures. They cooked together, haggled over plants at the local nursery, walked the city streets side by side, their hands brushing until it became instinctive to hold them. Even mundane tasks, like grocery shopping or doing laundry, took on a quiet intimacy. Hannah found joy in these ordinary things, surprised at how satisfying it was to share the everyday with someone who cherished the small gestures as much as the grand ones. One Saturday morning, they decided to tackle the apartment's tiny balcony, which had been more decorative than functional. Together, they cleared out dead plants, washed the tiles, and planted herbs and flowers that would bloom over the summer. Hannah knelt beside Claire, hands muddy, laughing when they accidentally splashed soil on each other. "This is domestic," Hannah said, smiling as she brushed a leaf from Claire's hair. Claire laughed softly. I like it. We're domestic together. Hannah looked at her, suddenly serious. I think I want more than just domestic. I want a life with you. Fully. Not just weekends or evenings, but all of it. Claire's hand found hers. I want that too. They sat there for a long while, fingers entwined, imagining what a shared life could look like. It wasn't fantasy, it was concrete: breakfasts together, holidays planned side by side, bookshelves overflowing with the stories they both loved, shared bills, shared spaces, shared burdens. And then they talked about what scared them. Claire admitted to worrying about past relationships and her fear of being hurt again. Hannah admitted her own hesitation, how years of careful restraint had made vulnerability feel risky. But they both agreed, the risk was worth taking. By evening, the balcony was alive with green and color, a small testament to their collaboration. They toasted with glasses of wine, laughing at the absurdity of soil on their clothes, and in that laughter, Hannah felt a profound sense of belonging. Love, she realized, was not only passion or poetry. It was also routine, responsibility, and care. It was showing up day after day, in small and large ways alike, and choosing each other consistently. That night, they lay together on the sofa, watching the city lights blink softly through the window. Hannah felt the full weight and sweetness of their connection, the months of restraint, the fear and desire, the trust that had been hard-earned. She turned to Claire, brushing her hair back, and whispered, I think we're ready for everything else. Claire smiled, curling closer. We're ready. Because we have each other. For Hannah, that certainty, the tangible, unshakable certainty, was more intoxicating than any first kiss, any stolen handhold. It was the foundation of a love meant to last. Home, Hannah realized, was never a place. It was a person. And with Claire, she had discovered what it meant to come home without moving an inch. By this point, their lives had begun to merge seamlessly. Hannah's keys jingled in Claire's apartment as if they belonged there. Claire's coffee mug had a permanent spot on Hannah's kitchen counter. Their wardrobes overlapped slightly, shoes creeping into corners they had once considered sacred, jackets thrown casually over chairs they now shared. Cohabitation was not dramatic, it was a series of quiet negotiations, shared meals, the hum of everyday life. They discovered each other in ways that no first kiss or whispered confession could teach, how Claire hummed absent-mindedly when stressed, the exact angle Hannah liked her pillows, the way their hands seemed to find each other naturally in the dark. One evening, Hannah arrived home late from work to find Claire in the kitchen, flour dusting her hair and cheeks. Baking? Hannah asked, smiling at the domestic tableau. Trying, Claire admitted. I thought we could use fresh bread tomorrow morning. Hannah joined her, kneading dough side by side. Flour covered both of their hands, their laughter, their clothes. Hannah caught Claire's gaze and felt the quiet depth of intimacy in the simplicity of shared labor. You know, Hannah said, I never thought I'd like someone enough to live like this with them. Claire smirked. Oh, you've wanted to, you just didn't know it yet. They laughed, but Hannah's heart ached a little with the truth of it. She had never imagined that trust could feel so ordinary, so comforting, so grounding. Later, sitting together on the couch with plates of bread and cheese, Hannah realized that home was not the apartment, not even the shared furniture. Home was the way Claire's hand rested on hers, the warmth of her shoulder against Hannah's, the soft cadence of her laughter. Home was the presence that made ordinary moments feel sacred. Evenings like this became routine. They cooked together, read together, sometimes argued gently over trivialities like which movie to watch or whose turn it was to take out the trash. But each day, each small act, built layers of trust, affection, and understanding that deepened their bond. One Sunday morning, Hannah awoke to Claire gently shaking her awake. Come on, she whispered. Sun's up. Coffee's made. And the balcony needs us. On the balcony, the city stretched out before them, golden in the early light. They tended to plants together, watered herbs, and adjusted the seating just so, as if arranging the space also arranged the rhythm of their lives. Hannah took a deep breath, feeling the sun warm her face and Claire's hand in hers. "This," she said softly, "this feels right." Claire smiled, brushing her fingers along Hannah's. "It is right. Because we're here. Together." Hannah rested her head on Claire's shoulder, watching the city come alive around them. She understood that home was not about perfection or space, but about being present and seen, about trust and shared life. And with Claire, she was finally home. Love, Hannah realized, was no longer confined to the quiet corners of their apartments or the private language of hands brushing. It had begun to spill outward, touching the world around them. And sharing the world, she discovered, was both exhilarating and unnerving. Their friends noticed first. Casual invitations to dinners, weekend trips, or movie nights now came with Claire included. Conversations shifted from, "Do you have plans this weekend?" to, "Are you and Claire free?" It was simple, natural, yet Hannah felt a flutter of anxiety she hadn't anticipated. She had grown accustomed to the privacy of their love, and suddenly it was visible. The first time Hannah introduced Claire to her closest friend Miriam, she felt her chest tighten. Miriam had been a constant through Hannah's highs and lows, and she worried about judgment or discomfort. But when Claire stepped forward with her warm smile, steady gaze, and quiet charm, Miriam's reaction was immediate, an embrace, laughter, and a delighted approval that settled Hannah's nerves almost instantly. "She's wonderful," Miriam said later, giving Hannah a knowing look. "I can see why you're falling for her." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "I've already fallen." Family was a different story. Some relatives were cautious, polite, curious, occasionally awkward. Others were warmer than Hannah expected, offering kindness and small gestures of acceptance that spoke louder than any words. Each interaction was a lesson in patience and trust, a reminder that love did not exist in a vacuum, it was constantly negotiating with the outside world. They also began attending public events together, gallery openings, book launches, casual dinners with colleagues. At first, Hannah felt exposed, hyper-aware of her connection with Claire. But as the months passed, it became natural. Their ease with each other, the subtle touches and shared laughter, communicated more than words ever could. One evening, at a mutual friend's rooftop party, Hannah watched Claire across the crowd. She laughed, eyes crinkling, completely herself. Hannah realized then how much she had come to rely on this shared presence. She moved to Claire's side, wrapping an arm around her waist, and whispered, "I'm glad we're out here together." Claire leaned in, resting her head on Hannah's shoulder. "Me too. I was nervous at first, but now, it feels right." They danced, loosely, laughing when the music shifted unexpectedly. Hannah felt an immense gratitude, for Claire, for their love, for the courage it had taken to be visible, to share themselves with the world. By the end of the evening, as they walked home hand in hand, Hannah realized something vital. Love was not just about being together in private. It was about choosing to face the world together, to show up, to endure scrutiny, curiosity, or misjudgment, and still remain unwavering. Claire squeezed her hand, sensing the thought. "We make a good team," she said. Hannah smiled. "The best team." And in that moment, Hannah understood that sharing the world with Claire was not a risk, it was an expansion. A promise that their love could exist fully, in every corner of life, both private and public, without losing its depth or tenderness. Life, Hannah realized, had a way of testing the very things you held most sacred. Just as love had become visible and steady, challenges appeared, not catastrophic, but enough to rattle confidence and stir fear. It began subtly. Work pressures increased for Hannah, with extra responsibilities piling on unexpectedly. Late nights at the office meant missed dinners with Claire. Claire's own projects demanded more of her attention, her evenings spent in archives or at client meetings. They tried to communicate, but the friction of fatigue and stress seeped into their interactions. One Thursday, Hannah arrived at Claire's apartment exhausted, shoulders heavy. She slumped onto the couch, not meeting Claire's eyes. "You're tense," Claire observed, voice gentle but firm. "Talk to me." Hannah shook her head. "I don't want to dump work stress on you." "You can," Claire said, taking her hand. That's what I'm here for. Hannah exhaled sharply, the weight of weeks pressing down. I'm just scared I'm not giving enough. I'm worried I'll let you down, or that I'll fail at this, at us, like I've failed before. Claire tightened her hold. Hannah, love isn't a ledger of success and failure. It's a partnership. We grow together. We stumble together. We support each other. That's what matters. Hannah wanted to believe it, and she tried. But the old fear lingered, whispering that her past mistakes would dictate the future, that the delicate trust they'd built could unravel under the strain of ordinary life. Then, unexpected external pressure arrived. A former acquaintance from Hannah's past surfaced, speaking ill of her choices, hinting at rumors, attempting to sow doubt and tension. Hannah tried to dismiss it, but for the first time, she noticed how sensitive Claire had become to judgment. The smallest comment from a stranger or colleague could ripple through their world, unsettling what they had built. That evening, they sat together on the balcony, the city stretching before them in glowing windows and distant sirens. Silence hung between them, heavy but not hostile. I don't want outside noise to touch us, Hannah admitted quietly. But sometimes it does. Claire nodded, thoughtful. Life will always throw distractions. The only thing we can control is how we respond. And we respond together. Hannah took a deep breath, letting the words sink. She realized that love was not just warmth, joy, and tenderness. It was endurance, patience, and courage in the face of unpredictability. The challenges, both internal fears and external pressures, were not signs of weakness. They were opportunities to strengthen the bond they had carefully nurtured. Later, in the quiet of Claire's apartment, they held each other close, fingers entwined, hearts steady. Hannah felt the reassurance of Claire's presence like a shield, a reminder that even storms could be weathered together. By the time Hannah walked home later that night, soaked in both rain and reflection, she understood something crucial: love is not proven when everything is easy. It is proven when two people choose each other despite uncertainty, fatigue, fear, or interference. And Hannah knew, with absolute clarity, that she would choose Claire every single time. By now, Hannah and Claire had grown confident in the sturdiness of their bond. The challenges they had faced, the fears, the external pressures, the small, persistent uncertainties, had not weakened them. Instead, they had clarified what mattered: each other. And with that clarity came the excitement of looking forward, of imagining a shared future in both ordinary and extraordinary ways. One Sunday morning, they sprawled across the couch with coffee and notebooks, sunlight spilling through the windows. Maps, travel brochures, and sketches of apartment renovations were scattered across the table. I think we should start planning the Italy trip, Claire said, excitement bright in her voice. Rome, Florence, maybe a week in the countryside? Hannah smiled, tracing the edge of a brochure with her finger. Yes. And I want to see the vineyards in Tuscany. Imagine us biking between towns, stopping for lunch at little cafes. She trailed off, lost in the possibility. It will be perfect, Claire agreed. We can make it our first big adventure together. It wasn't just travel, though. They talked about their work, their careers, and the ways they could support one another. Hannah shared her desire to develop a community project for students who struggled academically, and Claire offered her connections and insight. They sketched a timeline for merging professional growth with personal fulfillment, each idea bolstering the other. Even the smallest plans were infused with meaning. They debated paint colors for the living room, discussed furniture placement, and playfully argued about whether the balcony needed more plants or more seating. Hannah realized that these tiny decisions, once mundane or trivial, were now symbolic of shared life, a physical manifestation of trust and compromise. I used to be afraid of all this, Hannah admitted quietly, her hand brushing Claire's across the table. Afraid that committing to someone would mean losing myself, or losing freedom. Claire's eyes softened. But you haven't. You found a way to be fully yourself and fully with me. Hannah nodded, heart swelling. Yes. With you, I can plan, dream, and take risks. And know you're there. Later that night, they sat on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, the city glittering beneath them. "We should start talking seriously about, life milestones," Claire said gently. Hannah's pulse quickened. "You mean, marriage?" Claire smiled. "I mean life together. Whatever that looks like. I want to make plans with you, Hannah. Real plans. Not just trips or furniture, but everything." Hannah felt both exhilaration and vulnerability. It was a step she had imagined but never thought would feel so immediate, so tangible. "I want that too," she whispered. "With you." They toasted quietly to dreams, to plans, and to a love that had survived fear, scrutiny, and uncertainty. And as the night deepened, Hannah realized that dreaming together was not about escaping reality, it was about creating it, shaping a life that belonged to them both, built on trust, patience, and unwavering devotion. For Hannah, the realization was profound. Love was no longer a series of cautious firsts or tender moments. It was a future waiting to be written, and they were the authors. The first holiday season they spent together was quiet but transformative. Hannah had always celebrated with her small circle of family, the traditions passed down from her childhood, cinnamon-scented candles, homemade pies, and evenings spent around the dining table telling stories that stretched back generations. Claire had never experienced a holiday quite like this, structured yet warm, nostalgic yet comforting, and she approached it with a mixture of curiosity, reverence, and gentle awe. Hannah's apartment had been transformed with soft lights, pine-scented wreaths, and carefully placed ornaments that held stories of their own. When Claire arrived, she was struck not only by the aesthetic, but by the thoughtfulness Hannah poured into every detail. "I've never seen a tree like this at my parents'," Claire admitted, laughing as she examined the mismatched ornaments. "But I love it. It feels alive." Hannah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Claire's face. "It's more than just decorations. It's memory, it's family, it's home. I want to share it with you." The evening unfolded with laughter, music, and small acts of intimacy, Claire helping Hannah in the kitchen, Hannah showing Claire how to frost the pies just right, both of them tasting each creation as if it were the most important meal of the year. When Hannah's family arrived, Claire was nervous. First impressions mattered, and family could be intimidating. But she fit in effortlessly, charmingly polite, yet unabashedly herself. Hannah's mother reached for her hand, warmth in her eyes. "She's wonderful, Hannah," her mother whispered. "I can see why you're happy." By the end of the night, Claire felt like a part of the family, not as an outsider or guest, but as someone woven into the threads of Hannah's life. Hannah watched her interact with ease and laughter and felt a surge of affection so deep it nearly made her breath catch. Over the following months, they began creating their own shared traditions: Sunday breakfasts with freshly baked bread, weekend trips to local markets, and quiet evenings where they exchanged small gifts with no occasion other than thoughtfulness. They discovered that heritage could be fluid, old traditions embraced, new ones created, blending their lives seamlessly. One snowy evening, as they returned from a market laden with fresh vegetables and fragrant bread, Claire paused on the doorstep of their apartment. "Hannah," she said softly, "I think this is the first time I've felt completely at home during the holidays. Not just comfortable. Not just happy. Home." Hannah's heart swelled. She took Claire's hands in hers, warming them against the winter chill. "That's exactly how I feel too. And I want every holiday, every ordinary day, to feel this way with you." As the snow fell softly around them, the city quieted in its evening hush, Hannah realized something profound. Love was not just about moments of intensity or firsts. It was about belonging to someone, to a life, to shared history, and to a future carefully and tenderly built together. And in that quiet winter glow, with Claire's hand in hers and warmth radiating through her chest, Hannah knew that she had found something eternal, a love that could hold both the ordinary and the extraordinary, and make both sacred. The first anniversary of their love approached quietly, without fanfare, but with a weight of meaning that neither Hannah nor Claire could ignore. It was more than a date, it was a marker of survival, of patience, of months spent building trust and intimacy that had withstood fear, scrutiny, and the unpredictable trials of life. They chose to celebrate simply. A weekend getaway to the countryside, a small cottage surrounded by autumn trees, windows framing golden light and the quiet rustle of leaves. Hannah packed a notebook, her thoughts scribbled haphazardly, while Claire brought wine, blankets, and her own quiet excitement. When they arrived, they unpacked slowly, lingering in the familiarity of being together away from the rhythm of city life. Afternoon sunlight poured through the windows as they made tea and settled onto the couch. Hannah took Claire's hand, their fingers entwining naturally. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Hannah asked softly, the words almost reverent. Claire's eyes sparkled, a mix of amusement and deep affection. "I can. And I can't. It's been both the longest and the shortest year of my life." They laughed, then fell into comfortable silence, reflecting on the months behind them. They recalled first touches, first confessions, the anxieties of revealing their love to friends and family, and the quiet victories of trust and patience. Each memory was a thread, woven into a tapestry of shared experience. Hannah looked at Claire, heart full. "Do you remember that first kiss on the balcony? How hesitant we were." Claire nodded, smiling. "And now? Now I can't imagine being hesitant with you." They shared a quiet meal, toasting to the year behind them and the countless possibilities ahead. Later, they walked along the river, hands intertwined, the reflection of city lights rippling across the water. "I've been thinking," Hannah said, stopping to face Claire. "About everything we've built, about everything we still want." Claire tilted her head, curious. "I want us to keep growing," Hannah continued. "Travel more, dream more, face challenges together. I want a life where we look back not with regret, but with gratitude for the choices we made and the love we nurtured." Claire brushed a loose strand of hair from Hannah's face. "I want that too. And I want us to keep celebrating milestones like this, not just the big ones, but the small ones too. Every day we choose each other is a milestone." Hannah smiled, feeling the quiet magnitude of their commitment. Love, she realized, was cumulative, the sum of firsts, of shared routines, of quiet courage, of celebrations both grand and intimate. That night, in the cottage's warmth, they lay together, tracing the contours of each other's faces, whispering stories of the year behind them, and dreaming aloud about the future. Hannah felt a sense of permanence she hadn't allowed herself to imagine before, love that was steady, resilient, and capable of encompassing both their vulnerabilities and their joy. As they drifted to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Hannah understood something profound. Anniversaries were not merely markers of time. They were moments of reflection, gratitude, and a quiet reaffirmation that the love they had chosen, nurtured, and protected was strong enough to last a lifetime. By the time Hannah and Claire reached this chapter of their lives, the world felt both familiar and infinite. Their love, carefully nurtured through months of firsts, challenges, holidays, and milestones, had grown into a steady, unshakable presence. But they were no longer content to exist only in the private sphere. They wanted to build a future together, a life with roots, purpose, and perhaps, one day, a family. One crisp morning, they walked hand in hand through the park, the air sharp and invigorating. Claire paused at a small bench beneath a tree just turning gold for the season, turning to face Hannah. "I've been thinking," Claire began, "about what comes next. About us. About how we want our life to look in the long term." Hannah's heart thumped. "Go on. I want us to build something lasting. Not just memories or adventures, but a family. Together. If you're ready." Hannah felt warmth flood her chest. She had always imagined a family in some hazy, distant way, but never thought it could feel so tangible, so real. "I am," she said softly. "With you." "Yes. Absolutely." They spent the following months planning carefully, exploring options for adoption, discussing logistics, talking to counselors and friends, and envisioning the life they wanted to create for a child. Every conversation was layered with hope and seriousness, laughter and quiet reflection. It was no small undertaking, but it felt natural because they were doing it together. Meanwhile, they continued to nurture their personal dreams. Hannah's community projects flourished, supported by Claire's guidance and connections. Claire's work reached new heights, yet she always returned to the shared apartment, to the rituals and routines that grounded them both. One evening, after a long day, they sat on the balcony wrapped in blankets, glasses of wine in hand, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. "I never imagined," Hannah said, leaning into Claire, "that love could feel like this. So full, so patient, so ours." Claire kissed her temple. "It's ours because we chose it every day. Because we protect it. Because we dream together." And soon, their dreams became reality. A child entered their lives, not as a fleeting wish, but as a chosen, beloved presence. Every diaper changed, every bedtime story, every scraped knee comforted was an act of love that deepened the bond between them. They were a family in every sense, messy, joyous, complicated, and utterly beautiful. Years passed, and Hannah watched as their adopted daughter grew, carrying pieces of both of them, the love and lessons they had nurtured. Hannah and Claire celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and quiet ordinary mornings alike, their love deepening into a legacy that could not be diminished by time, circumstance, or the outside world. Hannah reflected on the journey, from tentative first touches, whispered fears, and whispered confessions on balconies, to public love, shared holidays, and finally, the creation of a life together. Each chapter of their story had been deliberate, messy, joyous, and fiercely real. As they tucked their daughter into bed one night, Hannah and Claire held hands in the doorway, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. They had built a life they had dreamed of, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. And in that certainty, Hannah understood the profound truth she had been discovering for months: love, when tended patiently and courageously, could endure anything. It could survive fear, scrutiny, and time. It could expand beyond two people to create a family, a home, and a legacy. The future, finally, was in their hands. And for Hannah, Claire, and their daughter, it was brighter than they had ever imagined. Years later, their daughter, bright, curious, and deeply perceptive, sat on the balcony with Hannah's journal in her lap. She had read every entry, every memory, and asked questions about how two women had fallen in love and built a life together. "Mom," she said softly, "I think I understand. You and Claire, you made love a home. And that home is me too." Hannah hugged her tightly, feeling the full circle of their journey. "Yes, sweetheart. You are our home, and our legacy, and everything we hoped for." Through her eyes, the story of Hannah and Claire became timeless, a tale of patience, courage, devotion, and the quiet, powerful act of choosing each other every single day. Their love, once tentative and whispered, had become living, breathing, and eternal. And in that moment, Hannah knew, the story they had begun together would continue long after their own chapters ended. Because love, real and fearless, leaves traces that echo across generations. But the world was about to test the one thing they couldn't afford to lose.